Welcome everyone to another edition of the Industry Zoom call with today Brian Leitner. We're happy to have him with us from Mariner Platform Solutions. He's the head of Mariner Platform Solutions, in fact. So help me out, Brian. What is Mariner Platform Solutions?
Well, Tony, thanks first and foremost for having us today. We appreciate it. So Mariner Platform Solutions is a 1099 model for advisors. They could be leaving the wirehouses, they could be an RIA today, maybe they're at an IBD, wherever they might be, but they're interested in owning their own business, building enterprise value, but they're really looking for a lot of the resources that they need to take them to the next level, right? To elevate that client experience, increase their value proposition, and help them grow their business. And that's exactly what we do with the resources that we built, within the greater Mariner family.
Right. I think resources is the key thing, because as you know, I've started a couple of RIAs, as you know, and you're always lacking resources when you start, and you're at a point where it's a mature company, right? So you have an interesting opportunity to sort of provide, what you think, where you think the cutting edge resources need to go. And I know you're out in the field all the time. I know you're talking to advisors, right? What are you hearing? Where I know you're allocating resources to a certain thing, and where are advisors telling you to spend that money?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think when a lot of people talk about resources, there's so many different types of resources, right? There are resources that keep the lights on, like operations and technology and compliance and those things, which are really important. But then we talk to advisors about the resources that, like I said, really provide an elevated client experience and increase that value proposition. And I'll give you maybe a couple of ideas of what I mean by that. If you think about the environment today, I think a lot of folks are waking up to the fact that, and advisors admitting that, hey, you know what, I can't necessarily beat the market. Right. And so if I was leading with that for years, right, and I was that investment advisor, what additional value can I now add to that relationship? And what I love to ask advisors is pretend for a second that you didn't have anything to do with investments. So what are you doing for clients today? What does that look like?
What's interesting about that is that, when you look at a lot of the larger firms, I mean, they're investment centric in their resources, right? I mean, there's research, there's this, is that, and that stuff's becoming commoditized. So, I mean, research is everywhere. I mean, it's great to have good research, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of good research, out there. And even the amount of things you can buy, mutual funds, ETFs, they're all sort of becoming, there's a commoditization going on with thought.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think a lot of folks now sort of readily admit that. I think it's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not our value proposition, right? So when I think about other areas that we're having, conversations, and I talk about some of our resources, one that comes up constantly is tax. If you think about, again, if the investment markets have been commoditized a bit and may continue to do so, and a lot of the industry pundits out there will tell you that, returns may not be what they have been. So where do we add alpha? And so we refer to that as tax alpha. Where do we add that? And so today, within the Mariner organization, and for folks on the MPS platform, they have access to over 100 CPAs that we've built out over the last, say, 7 or 8 years as part of our national tax practice to help them and their clients either provide tax advice, tax planning, and we will even file the tax returns for those individuals if they so choose.
Well, I mean, that's pretty good timing. You've been doing that for a while, but I mean, we're in a situation where there's never been a greater, I'm not trying to get political about it, but there's just the tax issues are confusing. They potentially could change the way we have a relationship with our clients. I mean, capital gains, carried interest, things like that those are real tax issues that we have to prepare for, that we didn't have to before.
And the way you think about it, I mean, if you just think about it, maybe even from an estate tax perspective, let alone an income tax perspective, if you think about how much wealth that you can add to somebody's situation just from good proactive tax planning, because that's another piece of it. There are a lot of folks that are out there, a lot of tax consultants, a lot of CPAs that specialize in this. There are a lot of great ones too. But the reality is a lot of folks just aren't proactive in this space, and that's where you truly add value. And so to be able to do that within the Mariner organization at MPS and be able to marry what that advisor is doing from whether it's an investment perspective, a risk management perspective, and how tax plays a role in all of those financial decisions, it's a critical component.
So you guys have hired those folks, you've made them part of the team, actual CPA/tax professionals, and they're available to the advisors to use.
Yeah. So when we refer to some of our resources we refer to these as our advisory solutions resources. These are all employees of the organization. So what that means is, so that's 100 CPAs from a tax perspective. We own our own boutique investment bank and business valuation practice. We built our own trust company from scratch years ago. We have our own risk management division. Then we have a practice management and consulting division, as well as a large investment team. So these are some of the resources that we can surround our advisors and help take a lot off their plate. I mean, that's sort of the name of the game. Everybody's greatest asset is time. So how do we give them back more time?
Well, that, in my mind, that's critical, right? How do you get more time, right? And not only this it's flirting with a couple things here. One is it flirts with the family office model a little bit, right? Having all these resources available to you, which I think all advisors could say, it's something I want to at least be able to offer this stuff, even if I don't have it all the time, because it's an expensive thing to set up if you were doing it on your own, right?
Sure.
Family office stuff. But clearly there are, parts of it when you're taking this holistic wealth approach that are easier to do today, maybe for the average advisor, sort of post-pandemic, than they were prior to. We're talking more to people about what they want to do with their money versus just their money, which sort of lends itself back to what you were saying. It's not investment centric anymore. And I think the conversations are changing with clients. I think that they're not, it isn't, if all you've talked about with your clients is investments between the pandemic and when it started and today, you're a crappy advisor.
Yeah. So again, great point. The conversations have changed. And I think that, for most folks, they're not necessarily interested in, did you beat the benchmark, this arbitrary benchmark by X amount of basis points or not? I mean, when they look back at a relationship, maybe 20 years from now, I don't think they're going to go tit for tat with a spreadsheet and say, this year, you beat it, this year you didn't. It's basically, let me walk you through what we've done for you. And you don't have to wait 20 years for that, obviously, but walking them through that. And it's, maybe it's something as simple as, you helped me with a difficult conversation that I had to have with one of my children, or you helped me through something that I didn't know how to handle that, but you guys had either the resources in-house or connected me with someone externally. You acted as that connector, right, to solve an issue for me. And so when we think about some of the bigger issues, whether it's family fighting or really it could anything in terms of the different ways that we can help them, a complex tax situation, maybe getting them risk management protection when somebody else couldn't, based upon our relationship and size, those sorts of things. And so it's absolutely about, what is my money doing for me? What's my advisor doing for me? And we spend a lot of time talking about what we do for clients, even outside of wealth management, right? I mean, how do we help them live a better life? Right.
And as far as resources go, what sort of resources do you have now in this new holistic world for advisors? I mean, how do we make sure advisors are prepared for what people, how they want to be approached in the future? I think that's why ESG kind of now is suddenly a thing. People want their values to be reflected in their investments, in a way that they didn't before. So as investments become commoditized, it becomes more about what I want to do with this money versus what this, the actual investment is. Same thing with the investment thing. I'm willing to take a few points off the top if you invest in what I want, what I believe in. Right.
Yeah. The whole idea of personalization.
That's kind of a new thing. I mean, it's been around for a while, but.
I think so. I think personalization is big, and whether it's on the ESG side or whether it's on the direct indexing side, so specifically, how do I add value to not only accomplish what the client wants, but ultimately either save them money in taxes or fees, and add, I think add in other ways to add value. Again, like I said, maybe outside of even wealth management. So again, thinking about their family. Like I always say to folks, if you do something for me, I really appreciate it. You do something for one of my kids or a family member, I'm in debt to you. So, where advisors can spend some time just simply thinking about, walk away from the investments for a minute, take a look at each of your clients, take a look at their families, understand what's going on with their families and spend time there, and then figure out how you can help them in a given situation. I mean, we talk about referrals and growth and all those sorts of things. I don't know that you get referrals from, maybe being in line with the benchmark or something on the investment side. Yeah. But if it's something that's close to their heart, that's truly meaningful to them, that's something that not only makes a difference in their lives, but that's something that they go out and talk about.
Yeah. And I guess for, wanting to grow your business, or advisor wants to grow their business, right? How do I quantify that sort of thing and then repeat it, because I want to keep getting referrals, right? I want to grow my business. That's the key piece of it. What do you see going on as far as the future? We know we're talking in general about what we're taking out of this post-pandemic world, that maybe it's become a lot more relational, with clients. There's a much more holistic, kind of point of view. And it even goes down to investing with things like ESG. What's the future in your mind, or what are you hearing from advisors, or even how is your firm preparing for what you think is going to happen next?
Yeah, great question. I think the pandemic has taught us a lot. I mean, so really great advisors have been spending a lot of time with clients and prospects throughout the entire COVID pandemic. And I think they've learned a lot more about their clients. They have a lot more, for lack of a better word, data on their clients, whether that's, probably more qualitative at this point.
They're doing more of this. I mean, it's even one of those things where if I'm seeing you it's very different to come to my office than I've talked to you 20 times in your house. I've seen the kids run by, you're in your bathroom, right. You've had a drink while we're on the phone. I mean, it's just different, and they've seen your house too. Right.
And they hear the dog in the background, and then you start talking about the dog.
My dog to bark, believe me. This is water, by the way, not vodka.
Appreciate the so having said that, I think data is going to be a big component. And the reality is, look, if the tech companies have taught us anything, it's understanding the more data that we have on our clients, the more personalized we can make that client experience. And that's what's really important. And so I would challenge advisors to think about how much data they have, whether it's quantitative, then understand what the qualitative is, and how do they begin to consider marketing different services to them based upon those needs. So that's one thing as it relates to the future. I think data is a big component. Another big component, especially out of COVID, is health. So we were having these conversations prior to COVID. I think it's really important for advisors to begin to have conversations around someone's health. We always say as financial planners, look, if you tell me when you're going to die, I'll tell you the best decisions you can possibly make. Well, we don't know that. We don't have a crystal ball. But engaging in that conversation is important for so many different reasons. One,
it's easier now. That's easier now. I mean, with COVID, it's easier to talk about, this may happen to you.
Absolutely correct. But even understanding, what's in the family history? What does that look like? How long did mom and dad live? What kind of surgeries have you had? Have you ever spent time in a hospital before? I mean, things like that. It's an incredibly personal conversation. But to be able to have that conversation, I mean, it's just as simple as, I like to give this example. It's a true story, but husband and wife walk in and they're talking about all these different goals they have and everything they want to do with the grandkids. And they're really excited. Well, one of the individuals is obese, really overweight, and one spouse looks to the other that's overweight and says, if he'll be here, we can probably do all these things. Right. And it's a great conversation to have with both those individuals to talk about health at that point in time.
And of course, it's got to color your investment recommendations, doesn't it? I mean, if you talk to somebody and regardless of their age, if they're in their 40s but they've had a heart attack, or you're probably smart to invest in something different than a crazy small cap something, right?
Imagine for a second now that you have a client and you've had this client maybe for 4 or 5 years, but you didn't know that they have X amount of stints in them, or they've had 2 heart attacks in the past. This is really important information to know. But if health didn't come up because they had enough life insurance, there was never an issue on that. I mean, these are some significant gaps, right? And so those are 2 areas that I think in the future are definitely going to play a role.
And what I like about that is, when I had an active practice, and this is 20 something years ago, we never asked about that. 30 years ago, we never asked about health. Ever.
It's a very different business than it was way back when, right?
We talk about, life insurance and estate planning, but we didn't talk about that stuff. We just didn't bring it up.
And the reality is, again, it goes back to time. And so, hey, all these topics are great. And if I had more time, maybe I could spend additional time truly trying to understand, every aspect of my client's life. But finding the time is difficult. And I think that's where, obviously, folks like ourselves can play a role in providing advisors more time, because as much as we can take off their plate, they can spend this additional time reinvesting in their practice and so forth.
Yeah, the concept of giving advisors back time is, key. If you could do that, you're giving them real help. I really also like what we talked about. I wrote it down that, how do you have to personalize things from here on out? You got to take all this information somehow and personalize your recommendations and offerings, right? Based on this new concept of health and holistic sort of planning.
That's right. That's right. And then think about what new services can you potentially roll out that address what's important to them, and whether that's
how few advisors today do life insurance. They just don't. Even though it's key to estate planning. It's key to this 40-year-old with the stents.
Yeah, it's part of a fundamental process of financial planning. And you're right, there are some people that don't want to be involved in it. And candidly, as a fiduciary, it's our responsibility to have those conversations, whether they're morbid or whether someone wants to have those conversations or not.
Yeah, and I think what's great about what you're doing for your firm is you're able. The other thing about, Mariner's not that old, right? It's hard for an older firm to sort of make these twists and turns and things like that. But for sure, you're able to put together what you want the way you want it based on today, because it's a smaller firm, right? So you're a little more agile. You're able to now you've added these CPAs and you have all this stuff. I wonder about the emergent independent firms. I think scale is important, right? And the scale where Mariner is still small enough to do things. What do you think about this? Because there's an ABC, A to Z list of new emergent, RIAs coming up, but I think they're going to need to affiliate. I think the things we talked about, taxes and, we didn't talk about regulation, but that's going to become more onerous. And then the ability to put together, 100 CPAs and things like that. And still maybe maintain your independence, right? That's going to be critical going forward.
I think what it comes down to is ultimately a lot of advisors got into this business to be shoulder to shoulder with clients. And that's where they want to spend their time. And at the end of the day, somewhere along the way, they woke up and they were a business owner. And you know what? I don't necessarily like wearing all these different hats. And then when I look at some of the staff that I have, they wear different hats and they don't do it as well as that one person. If they just focused on whatever that task was, they'd probably do it better, right? So going back to that, unique ability and where do people want to play and what do they want to do well? And so if we can have the advisors spend the majority of their time across the table or virtually in this day and age from their client or prospect, I think they're going to be happier. And what they have in return in terms of the resources behind the scenes are going to be folks that they only do that, right? So likely they're going to be better than, or that process is going to be better than what they currently have in place. And that's where I think we can add a lot of value.
Yeah. And that's, a brighter future. So we've actually gone like over 20 minutes or so, Brian. It seemed faster than that. Anything that I didn't ask you about that you really wanted to talk about, or are we good?
No, I think that covers it. I know that you said, hey, you asked me, do you want to ask me a question? I'm happy to ask you a question. I don't want to put you on the spot either.
Sure.
But my question was going to be, and I'll give it to you and you tell me if you want to answer it or not. Advisors talk about a lot of trend, like you've been in the business forever. Yeah. You talk to a lot of industry leaders. You know what the trends are. What are the trends that we're not talking about?
Well, I think they're the overarching, trends we have talked about. They all kind of fit under this banner. You said, advisors need time back. It's sort of this post-pandemic world. I think this has actually changed a lot of the way we think. The social unrest, you look back at all the pieces, I think a lot of trends that were sort of nascent during the pre-pandemic are now up, like post-pandemic. We had all this social unrest, and now ESG is a bigger thing. It was always there, but now it's a big deal. So I think there have been some fundamental changes, and there will continue to be, including with diversity, inclusion, and things like that. The business is shifting towards sort of a new dynamic, with that. So that's sort of the larger overarching trend, is that these things that have accelerated the pandemic and the way we did our business has accelerated, sure, change. I do think there are going to be some issues with scale as well, as we mentioned in this call, that, starting an RIA today is different than it was when I started 10 years ago, right? It's just different, and with regulation, I'm anxious to see what that comes out. You needing scale is going to be important. So you want to find a partner in a home that's going to make, sense. I also see on the wire sides, and this is now a long answer to the question, but that the Europeanization of our business is completed on the other side, that, advisors are locked into these firms either contractually or, actually locked in, and they're going to retire. Succession plan, the next generation that's coming up is not the same person. They're not entrepreneurs. They're not building new entrepreneurs. They've taken out of training. All those are dangerous trends, I think, for the basics of our business. But the good news on the indie side, and even on the regional side, and then you have big firms like Edward Jones or LPL, they're not sort of buying into that. They're still have an entrepreneurial bent. So the largest focus, Brian, is no longer wire versus indie, but it's entrepreneur versus employee. Are you an entrepreneur? And you can be at a 1099, or you can be a W-2 and still be an entrepreneur. Yeah. So that's going to be the big challenge going forward. So that was a long way of answering it because I couldn't think of it at first. But I appreciate the time, and we'll do this again. And really appreciate the relationship with Mariner.
Tony, thanks again for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.